now.
We are. And if you click on the
perfect.
participants, you will see under attendees all the students that are adding themselves now.
Oh, excellent.
31,
yes,
33.
look at that. The number is rising. Okay, wait. Let me make sure I pronounce the names right. Is it Kendall?
Yes.
Kendall and Brianna.
Yes.
Okay, cool. Gotcha. Kendall and Brianna.
Oh, 51, 52. Exciting. So I guess we said 10:50, so maybe I'll wait till at least that time to start so that everybody gets a chance to get out of their last period class. The kids are funny, they're like, it's such a short passing period. It's like, but you're not going anywhere.
Makes everything a lot simpler, right?
Yeah, but it's so hard to make up for that human interaction. I know Kendall and Brianna from last year, so a lot of the students from yearbook, so that one gelled right away. But the others, it took a while for the classes to develop a personality.
Of course, it's different too. Just not getting that. You know, when you're in a live room, you can read the room a lot more clearly and understand the energy in the room, and like if people are enjoying themselves, it's just different. You know,
it is.
The same thing with book events. You know, when you're doing a reading or something, you can feel if people are into the reading or not, but you can't do that over Zoom. And then when you like crack a joke,
everyone's on mute. You're like, oh no.
Did that land? Yeah. On the other hand, the chat room kind of thing is really cool because people can have whole conversations that they wouldn't have been able to have. So I've done like author events with other writers and people be talking in the chat room the whole time, and it's really cool because they're like in conversation with you in a different way. There's good and bad to it. I just want us all to come out of this alive, you know?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's all I want.
Yeah. The numbers are terrifying. I feel almost like people are becoming like numb to it.
They are, and they are terrifying, and that's exactly what's happening. I was out on a walk this morning really early, and people were just walking around without masks and like walking right near each other, and I was like, what happened to the thing where you know, like, oh, come on.
I can't believe Indiana and Florida are fully opening despite their numbers going up. Like, it doesn't make sense.
Thankfully, New Orleans is staying more cautious as a city, so even if Louisiana is, you know, doing a lot, New Orleans is really like trying to keep things clamped down. So hopefully
New Orleans had a blow up, but then they kind of got it under control.
Exactly. Yeah, we really got it under control. It was great, and we're trying to keep it that way. It's hard because it's a tourist city, you know, and it's a lot of bars and a lot of party, and that's what people.
Yeah. Yeah. My daughter's a server in Indiana, and they're saying now that when they open, nobody's going to have to wear masks. And I told her, I was like, baby, I think I need you to quit. Like,
yeah.
And she was like, what do you mean? I was like, I don't think that you can work there and come home and your sister's here, I'm here. Like, I don't think that works out. And so she's looking around now, like trying to like hustle to find another job so she could quit this one before they open. But it's nuts. Well, I think it's 10:50.
All right.
So, girlies, this is your show. Thank you so much, Mr. Older and Mr. Gorley, for letting us do this. I'm so excited. I'm totally having like a geeky fan moment.
Awesome.
Okay, so shall we start then? All right. So my first question was, at what age did you realize that you wanted to write your first book, and was it hard to think of what you wanted to write about? And also, what made you want to write about fantasy and write young adult novels?
Okay, great question. There's multiple answers to that because on the one hand, I always wanted to be a writer. Wait, I think someone might need to mute. Is there an echo? Maybe not. Okay, no, it's fine. Yeah, I always wanted to be a writer. I always wanted to tell stories. I didn't always know how to tell those stories and which way I wanted to tell them. When I was a kid, I would draw all the time. I was just a cartoonist, and that's why you'll notice that that's like what Robbie and Sierra do to like process their struggles and everything. That's because of me. That's what I did. And I still do it. You know, I draw all the time. but that's not what I want to do for a living, you know. So I kept going, and like I love drawing and whatever. And then I grew up some more, and then in like my late teens and my 20s, I was playing music all the time. Like that's all I wanted to do, and I was telling stories with the music in college and whatnot. And then I was like, maybe that's not it. So really, like to write a book, like the time that I was like, I'm gonna write a book. I was 29, and I had been a paramedic for 7 years, I think. And so that was like my day job. And I was just doing all kinds of different stuff about music. I was doing little writing here and there. But it really wasn't until I was 29 that I was like, let me try writing a whole book and see what happens. And to answer the last part of the question, the reason it's fantasy is because that's what I've always loved my whole life. I've always been a nerd, a dork, in the best way. I said that in the best way. You know, I've just always loved fantasy. Star Wars, Greek mythology, Lord of the Rings, you know, all that stuff. When I was coming up, like that's all I wanted to read and to watch and to play and everything else. So it's super cool now to be an adult and still be a nerd and get to write that stuff, because I get to write for Star Wars now. You know, I get to write like my own stuff. Like it's a dream come true.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so what was your whole inspiration behind the Shadow Shaper like realm, and how like you put that whole entire world together and you mixed it with realistic things that happen today?
Great question. So part of it is that like at the time I was living in Brooklyn. I lived in Brooklyn for 14 years. I loved it. I still love it. You know, it was a place that really spoke to me. You know, like certain places you go and you walk down the street and it feels like the whole city is talking to you and it's alive. Like that's what Brooklyn has always felt like to me. And I loved it for that. And so it felt natural to write a book set there. But since like I said, I was a nerd, I am a nerd, and I wanted to bring in like all that magical stuff. And a lot of it, I'll be honest with you, a lot of it was because at the time, like Harry Potter was the big fantasy out there, right? And I was into it. Like I loved it in certain ways, and in other ways I was like, man, it's still like a white kid saving the world. Like after all this time, because that was one of the reasons I stopped reading fantasy for a while, was just because like I was looking for other Latinx people in there, and like Black and brown people in there, because that's the reality of this world, and they weren't there. You know, we weren't in fantasy, and I felt like fantasy didn't love me back as much as I loved fantasy. So I kind of turned away from it to try to find books that were telling me the truth about the world. I was reading history, politics, James Baldwin, you know, Bell Hooks, like great writers who wrote about, you know, what was really going on. But in my heart, I still wanted to read about magic. So then I came out, I found Harry Potter, and I was like, cool. And then I was like, the only kids of color in those books are like halfway side characters, barely show up at all. And I was mad, you know. And then I was like, what if Harry Potter was like a brown girl or a Black girl in Brooklyn, you know? And what if that magic wasn't the same old like European fairy tales that we hear over and over, but something different, something that like comes from us? And I thought about how cool it would be if like murals came to life, and if graffiti could like come to life and fight back against gentrification and police brutality and like all the other things going on. And like that whole idea just lit up my mind. And that's really where it all came from. And then it was a question of like just follow through. Like if you're gonna build a world, you can't just have a cool idea and then let it sit. You have to keep going and like play that out. So what does that mean? What is the history to that? You know, where does it come from? Who's against it? Who's for it? What are the powers that play out? And that's really where like a lot of the stuff that I studied when I was in college, and when I turned away from fantasy and I was reading up about power and race and gender and all that, like that really came into play then. Like all that stuff helps, you know? All that time I was a paramedic, all that like helped me learn how to, you know, think differently about the city and about people and about health and all that. So it all plays into each other.
All right, that's very really interesting answer. Like I really agree with you on that, and I really like find myself in your position as well in a lot of the books that we read nowadays. And going off of that, on you elaborated a little on this, but the next question that I had is, how was your career as an ENT influence your writing style and your overall creativity?
Yes, great question. So one great thing about being a paramedic is like you see all different parts of the city, right? Like no one else really gets to be that deep in the city in all those levels. Like, because why? People get sick and injured everywhere, you know? So we are literally like underground, like in the train stations, in the tunnels, like in all the hospitals, in the prisons. And then we're in like the rich people houses. We're in the mayor's mansion. We're all over the place, like, you know, courtrooms, all that. So you get to know a city, I think, better than anybody else if you're paying attention. And on top of that, you are with people in their like most dire moments, like their moments of crisis, like true crisis. So that's what stories are always about, right? Like stories are always telling the story of someone in crisis. Why? Because a crisis is a turning point. That's what that means, is like, that's when something changes. And if you think about it, every great story that you love, part of the reason you love it is because from the beginning to the end, something important has changed. There's something different that happened. So like for Shadow Shaper, you know, like Sierra, I hope y'all read it. It was a spoiler. You know, Sierra comes into her own, right? She steps into her own destiny. She learns how to be a part of this magical world, and she brings her friends in to do it with her, right? So something important changed. She had to fight her way to get there. So there was struggle. And like, that's what you're always writing about, whether it's like, a girl learning about magic, or whether it's a person understanding death or love for the first time, right? It can be about anything that changes, but something has to change. So when you show up to that 911 call, sometimes sometimes it's someone having a heart attack or someone dying or something like that. But sometimes, like, I'll never forget the dude we had. It was really early on in my career, and they came over as a cardiac condition, right? Cardiac is your heart. There's a 70-year-old man having chest pain. We were like, oh no, let's go over there, bum. We had all our equipment, and cardiac stuff is really what paramedics are good at. Like, we have all the medications for it. We have all the ways to check you out and help you out having a heart attack on the way to a hospital. So we fly over there, going through red lights, running up the staircase, get there all worn out. There's a little old guy just sitting in a chair very calmly. And we're like, what's wrong today, sir? Why'd you call 911? He said, I have a broken heart.
Aww.
Man, listen, we were like, oh, do you want to go to the hospital? Yes. I was like, how bad does it hurt? Like on a scale of 1 to 10. He was like 15.
Oh.
And look, man, like that was a crisis for him. You know what I mean? It wasn't anything I as a paramedic could do anything about, but having a broken heart sucks. And it hurt, and it was a turning point for him in whatever way it was that he needed it to be. So it teaches you that, like, all these moments in life, like, it might not be a turning point for you, but it's a turning point for somebody else. And so you pay attention to that, and you listen to, like, how families react in crisis and how people deal with difficult times, and do they step up or do they fall back, and all those different things. And all that comes to play on the page when you're trying to tell a good story.
And you kind of talked about it in before, but you were basically saying how being a paramedic allows you to know Brooklyn at its deepest parts. So I wanted to know how gentrification played a part in that, especially in all three of the books that are mentioned.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. It's so important. I just feel like you can't talk about Brooklyn and not talk about, like, one of the biggest changes that's happening in the streets of Brooklyn. But for so long, like, so many people didn't want to talk about gentrification. Like, now it's more of a topic, which it should be and it needs to be. But, like, at the time that I was living there, especially the first couple of years, like, and I was doing work in, like, organizing communities and doing, like, activist work and stuff like that. And it was still really taboo to talk about. And a lot of it is because it makes people really uncomfortable, because it's an uncomfortable conversation, especially for the people moving into the neighborhood. And that's exactly why it needs to happen. You know what I mean? And I included myself in that process. Like, we have to understand, because I'm from Boston originally. So coming to Brooklyn as an outsider, it was really important for me to understand, like, what does my presence in this neighborhood mean? And, what are the consequences of that? And there's no easy answers. You know what I mean? It isn't really about, like, this one person is guilty or not. It's about, like, there are systems at play that are always going to disenfranchise Black and brown people and poor people and get them out of a neighborhood. And that is wrong. Like, that is a displacement of people. You know what I mean? But it gets people frame it as, like, yeah, but we're getting nice coffee shops. And, like, yeah, but, like, there's all these, like, vegan bakeries and all this stuff. And it's like, there has to be a way to have, like, your vegan bakeries and keep brown and Black people around. I believe that there's a way to do that. I don't know what it is. I'm not a city planner, but I do know that people having to move forcefully out of the neighborhood is bad. And not being able to talk about it is why it keeps happening. So to me, it was like, honestly, on a basic level, like, not politics aside, it's just about telling the truth. Like, you can't ignore that this is a huge thing going on in Brooklyn. you know, that an entire population is disappearing from the streets of Brooklyn. And it's a population that made Brooklyn as we know and love it what it is. So I read a lot of books about New York that acted like none of that was going on. And it made me mad because it felt like a lie, because it was a lie. It is a lie to not talk about something so huge. And so I felt like if I was going to write this series about Brooklyn and be honest about it, that was going to be a part of the story no matter what.
Going off of Ken's question, a lot of what you said about gentrification, it also includes racial situations. Why do you think that's important to show real day-to-day life of a group of minorities?
Yeah, I think especially because, like I said, with the gentrification piece, like people don't talk about it, you know, enough. More so now, yes, and that's, you know, why we're seeing changes happen, because people are stepping up and talking about it. Mind you, when I say people, I mean like in the public sphere, right? Like we all talk about it all the time, right? But like in terms of like the news covering it and books talking about it, you know, like it's often just in like very small circles, or, you know, you're only allowed to have the conversation in certain ways. And it's like, no, that's not how you make change. The way you make change is by facing what happened and being honest about it and dealing with it like up front and saying like, this is what happened. This is where you got me messed up. Here's how we need to heal and do better, period. If we can't do that, we can't move forward, you know, and that's why we're here, you know, in this place that we're at in this country. That's why things are on fire in part, is because people have not been able to own up to the past and what's happened, including the present and what's happening right now. So for me as a writer, you know, I feel like that's my job, is to be honest about that. Even if I'm writing fantasy, it's still to be honest about that so that we can move this conversation forward and get free.
So going off of what you said, I thought it was really cool how you used your platform to like talk about political issues as well as create a story. So I was wondering, how did you balance between choosing to say the political message and trying to get the story together?
Great question. Thank you for that. It's because it's a struggle. Like you have to be really strategic about it. And one thing that I'll say though is that people act like what you just asked is impossible. You know, like they'll just say like if you read certain blogs or whatever opinions, you know, like there'll be folks that are like, as soon as you bring politics into the work, it gets corny or preachy. But that's not true. And like, I hope you feel that way, that, you know, that's not true because of my work, but also there's a lot of work out there that, you know, that deals with political stuff and deals with the world and isn't preachy. And in fact, if we really are being honest, all the work out there is political. It's just in a way that like, we're so accustomed to that being the mainstream idea, we don't even see it that way. But if you start reading back on some of that stuff that I said, that I name checked when I was, you know, talking about what I loved when I was a kid, a lot of that stuff is like super white supremacist. Like, it's like, yes, white people save the world, or white people are, you know, destroying the evil black masses, or all this other stuff. And like, that's very dangerous. Like, that's a very real thing that's been it's normalized, right? We're just used to it and being that's the norm in literature. But that's political. That's a political point of view, right? And so the idea that like suddenly when we want to talk about liberation and getting free, that's when it's political. That's what I have a problem with. You know what I mean? So for me, it was like, is exactly your question, is the question that I asked myself, like coming into this series. And how am I going to like, first of all, just tell the truth about the world as I know it. That's a political act in this day and age, unfortunately. And then second of all, like, I think strategically where it came down to for me is like, you guys know what world building is? World building basically means like when you're creating the world around, you know, the characters. So the magic system, so Brooklyn, like all those pieces are world building, right? As opposed to like the story. And they're connected, but they're also like, it's helpful to think of them in separate realms a little bit because the story is happening in that world. So I knew my world was going to be Brooklyn, and I knew there was going to be magic in it. And I knew I wanted to bring in all the things about Brooklyn that I knew to be true, like gentrification, like how diverse and amazing it is, like how you can be on like one block and meet people from like 16 different countries, you know what I mean? And they all like get along, even though half of them don't speak each other's language, right? Like you can go into the bodega and like get like 12 different kinds of food from different countries. It's amazing. I love that. So I wanted that all to be true in the book. And that's all world building, you know what I mean? And in world building, you have room to just show things the way they are. Like you can tell stories just by showing, you know, like how things are. So like a block in Brooklyn will have that bodega, and it'll have a nail salon. It'll have a church, like a storefront church, and then it'll have like a bakery that sells like $15 cups of coffee. You know what I mean? And like all that tells a story right there. And everyone knows what that story means. It means gentrification. And like, they might not have that word handy at the minute, or they might not know the full implication of it, but everyone knows what that means because it's happening all over America. So it was my job to tell that story and use the setting as a means to say, like, look what's going on. Here's what these characters have to deal with. And then to take someone like Sierra and be honest about, like, what's her emotional feeling going through a world that used to feel like home and suddenly is being taken out from under them.
Going off of that, so there's like you said, there are a lot of different diversity and all that. So Tia Rosa in your first book, in your first Shadow Shepherd book, was a very controversial character. Was she intended to deliberately highlight the problems of anti-Black racism and colorism in the Latinx community, and why would you think that's important?
Yeah, exactly that. That's exactly her role. And what really sucked, but was also like, I don't know what to say about it, but is that like so many people, even beyond Latinx communities, were like, oh yeah, I have a Tia Rosa. Like everybody has a Tia Rosa. Not just that, but the detail of what she says when she's like, don't date anybody darker than the bottom of your foot. That's something that literally like happens in cultures like all over this world. Like Asian cultures have that exact phrase in them. And that people have been told that, like, and it's so messed up how global anti-Blackness is. So that was a piece of it. I knew that to be true, but to find out sort of in that added way of people being like, oh yeah, I have a Tia Rosa, you know. I think most, you know, like there's just a Tia Rosa in like so many Latinx families. And, you know, for me, like I'm not Black, right? I identify as brown, like, and light brown at that. And so it was very important to be honest about how messed up like we can be, because privilege is being able to just be like, oh no, it's good, we're one happy family, what's the problem, you know what I mean? And that would have been like very easy to get away with, in part because publishing is so white and they're not trying to like put anti-Blackness on the spotlight or anything or talk about it, right? And some of them don't even know that it's going on or don't even differentiate between the Latinx communities. They're just like, cool, whatever. So I could have written a Latinx fantasy that was just like, everybody gets along. Hey, we have a cute abuelo. And like, that's a lie. That's another lie. And I didn't want to perpetrate that lie. And so, you know, I wanted Tia Rosa to be in there to like really to have that real conversation. And I also wanted Sierra to have a moment to shut her down so that people could be like, okay, here's a great example of like a young woman being like, no, like cut this out. You know, I see what you're doing and I'm not putting up with it, and stand up to her, because I just feel like we need to see that happen more.
So another character similar to Tia Rosa was Miss Rollins, the teacher who was introduced in the second book.
Oh,
so,
you guys went all the way through. This is so great. Yes, let's talk about that. Let's get into it.
So was she that teacher based off a personal teacher that you had, or does she represent like the population of the world who are like her?
Right. Was there a specific one? There's so many. Most characters are like different teachers, sort of different people thrown together throughout your life. Like even Sierra, you know, it's like god sister, friend, best friend, stuff I made up. You know, lots of different things thrown together. Miss Rollins doesn't have like a one-to-one equivalent, but I've worked with a lot of Miss Rollins, and I've had Miss Rollins for teachers in different ways. And what I really wanted to do was like show that there's a system in place, like we talked about gentrification, that really like pushes you, even if your heart is in the right place, the system is going to push you to doing the wrong thing. And it's very easy for that to happen, you know. And I with Miss Rollins, like I want to believe her heart was in the right place, but also that she was ultimately weak and not strong enough to be there for T in a way that she needed to be. Because there's your job is in your job description, and then there's your job is in the higher calling of what you do, right? And if you're a teacher, your real job is to be there for your students. But sometimes because of systems that are not built to help us, but are actually built to destroy us, that puts you in direct conflict with your higher calling job to help people, to be there for your student. And that's the situation that Ms. Rollins was in, and she cracked. And that's why and people suffer like very real consequences, including death, when other people who are responsible for them aren't up to the task of protecting them. And like people don't protect Black girls, especially. And that's really what was going on in that moment, is that she couldn't stand up to the larger system at play, and she cracked, and T paid the price. And here we are, right? I did want to give her the ability to like be deeper than just a problem, So that's why she shows up at the protest at the end. Like the moment does radicalize her. You know, she does realize like that was messed up. I played a role in something that I don't actually believe in, and I caused harm. And you know, who knows where it goes from there? But like she is more than just a mistake, and that was something I wanted to get across too.
All right. Changing the topic a little. When Sierra meets the Sorrows in the first book, in the first Shadowshipper book, there's a similarity and there's an illusion between when she threatens the Sorrows and when Perseus threatens the Grey Sisters. Why did you include that particular illusion?
Oh, you're talking about in Rick Riordan's book?
Yes.
Or are you talking about like the larger myth of Perseus?
Yeah.
Oh, they're the ones that pass the eye back and forth?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, you know, I didn't know I did that. But that's really cool. I love that. Because I told you I love Greek myths, so I'm sure it's in there. I'm sure I read it like when I was a kid, and I'm sure that it like snuck in and just became a part. But I'll tell you the real reason behind the Sorrows existing, there's two reasons. One was when I sold Shadowshaper, that was my first book that I wrote. And it took like, let me tell you, I sat down when I was 29, it was 2009. Some of y'all were barely born. And I wrote that book fast because I was excited. And I wrote the hell out of it in a couple months. And I started submitting it immediately. And I immediately got rejected. Now, I knew I was going to get rejected. It wasn't like, oh my God, I can't believe it. No, I knew going in. That was a thing. But I didn't know how much I was going to get rejected. Shadowshaper got rejected 40 times. 40. Yes. On the way to publication, I mean, agents and editors, they were not trying to hear about it. It took like, I think I got the acceptance from Scholastic in 2012. So it took years. It took 40 rejections. And I always tell people that because you got to know that that's a part of it. You know what I mean? Like, you can't let it stop you. I knew that, like, I was doing something important, and there were many times when I doubted myself and I wasn't sure, and those rejections did not help. But I had people, you know, in my ear and who had my back, very often Black women who were saying to me, look, like, this is important work. Like, you need to keep going. And I did. Thank God, you know, because 39 rejections in, I could have quit. And I wouldn't be here today talking to y'all. Still be a paramedic, which is a cool job. But I'm really glad I kept going. So anyway, so I finally sold it. But even then, they were like, no, we only want one book. And I was like, come on, you guys. Don't you think this should be a trilogy? And they were like, maybe. So, you know, publishing is very risk averse, meaning they're not trying to take risks. And I was a risk because I didn't have any of the books out. You know, I was writing about Black and brown kids, whatever. So so I was like, okay, I guess I'm just writing one book. Cool. But maybe one day they'll publish more books. So basically, like, that was one reason. So I put the Sorrows in there, being like, if there's ever more books than this, I want to have a thread to pull to be able to be like, well, what else is going on in this world? Like, who else can we explore? Who's a bigger bad guy? And then the second reason is, I like it when there's conflict within the bad guys. Like, I think that's super interesting. So to just have Wick as like this evil dude who went like nuts and came at everybody, that's cool, but it's so much more interesting if there's other people backing him. Because that's usually the reality of things. You know what I mean? Like, there's individuals who are bad, but if you get rid of them, there's always an individual who is also willing to step up because there are systems in place protecting them, right? Anytime they uncover another abuser, there's always like 15 people who've been around them making sure that they get away with it over and over. And that's something I think we need to address in literature. So it was about, you know, showing that there's like larger forces at play and that they were quick to turn on him, you know, when it suited their needs, right? And I thought that just opened up so many doors for possible dynamics. And then also I was just like, let me get a creepy church uptown, like when it's all dilapidated and messed up, and see what we can do with that as a setting. And so all those things kind of came into play.
Okay, so the next question is kind of based off of what you said about diversity and showing things that aren't normally shown. So why did you think it was important to start your trilogy off with a queer relationship of two women of color?
I mean, you know why. Because we don't see that enough. You know what I mean? Like, we don't see that enough. And when we do, it's so often presented as tragic or like doomed or just like that's the only thing that they're allowed to think about somehow. And like, it's a tough thing in literature right now, especially always really, is like trying to figure out how to navigate as a writer, like dealing with the real stuff that's going on for people, but also not making that the only thing that your characters deal with. And you see that argument play out a lot amongst writers who are like, you know, I want to tell the story of like people struggling with racism, with homophobia, with these different things. And also like, we are so much more than that, whoever we are, you know, we are more than our struggles, right? And also people just feeling fatigued, just like, you know, just reading the news every day is exhausting. And then it's like not no one, but a lot of people don't want to read about even more tragedy, you know, in books and on the screen. Like it's like further traumatizing yourself, right? On the other hand, like we don't want to lie about it and pretend that everything is fine. Like we've been talking about this whole time. So it's like, it's always like that balance is really tricky. And it's tricky in part because it's different for each reader, it's different for each writer. I just knew I really wanted in this book, like in this series and everything I do, to have like people casually being queer and not just being okay and being in happy relationships. And for me, like a big thread throughout that series, even though they're minor characters, they're side characters, but their relationship is really important to me. And like, I really wanted it to be complex and for them to like struggle with it, but ultimately like get on top of it and work it out and have love. So that's why, I don't know, did you guys get to the third book?
Yes.
Yeah. So, you know, like that's why that plays such a major role in the third book, is because their love, we've seen their love grow throughout this whole series. And like, you know, for them to have that finally have that really deep spiritual connection of being like what they became together, that was just really important to me because I love them. Like, those are my characters, you know. I love them kids.
So, about in the third book too, you mentioned them coming together and being air. So this ties in about what Sierra and all her other friends and all the other characters in the book have in relation with spirituality and forms of magic. So throughout this trilogy, you focus specifically on spirituality and those kinds of methods in shadow shaping. What made you want to take on this sort of like traditional, like this sort of magic?
Yeah. I'm laughing at this question in the comment section. We never even finished the first book. I don't know what you guys are going on about. All right, sorry, Chris. But it's about to get real. Well, I'm a santero, so I practice santeria, you know, so that's like a big part of my own tradition. I was also raised Jewish, and Catholic, so I just have tons of like different traditions that are part of me, you know, and like that's a part of everything I do. So with Santeria specifically, like we do ancestor work. So, you know, in my house, there's an altar for the dead of my family, you know, with pictures of them up and different things that they liked. And like, you know, they get coffee. When I make coffee, I put coffee down with them. When I make food, they get some food. When I'm confused about something, I talk to them and we like figure it out together. You know what I mean? So that's just a part of like the dead they've never been something scary. There's something that helps me and like gets me through. They got me here literally, you know, that's like who lifted us up to arrive here. So I try to keep that in mind when I'm working, and then like all that spiritual stuff, like it's world building. It's really good world building. Like if you start reading mythology, right? Like whether you call it mythology or spiritual text or philosophy, like it's all like a deeper way to look at life and looking at the different layers of things going on around you and everything like that. So for me, especially once I started getting into book 2 and 3 and I realized that I got to write a series, it was like, all right, well, if you're writing a sequel, the rule for sequels for me is like everything has to get deeper and everything has to get more dangerous. And so like once you follow that through, the logical conclusion is like things are getting bigger and bigger. And that's why in the third book, they go all the way back. You know, we get all that stuff back and we learn about some of the original lore of shadow shaping, is because that was all there waiting to be like played out, right? Like we were learning about it all throughout the series. So for me, writing that third book was an opportunity to really get deep with that stuff and really explore like how it affects things in the present day. Because that's so interesting, right? Like history is always moving with us no matter what. Like the things our ancestors did move with us. The things that people who tried to kill our ancestors did move with us. Like and we moved with that. And that's a spiritual question. That's a historical question. That's an academic question. And that's what Sierra and her crew are all struggling with, is the way that the past is catching up to them. And they have to fight mistakes that people made before them. You know, just like our kids are probably going to be fighting mistakes that we made. And we're, you know, but also our kids are hopefully going to be living in our legacies and doing, you know, like living good lives because of the fights that we had and the struggles that we had too.
Okay, so for our last question, we would like to ask, what message would you like to give young people of color, especially the ones that are witnessing the revolution with the Black Lives Matter?
Thank you for that question. I really want y'all to tell your stories. You know, I really want y'all to understand that, like, there's a lot of ways to fight. There isn't one way. There isn't one way to tell your story. There isn't one way to exist. There isn't one way to fight. Resistance takes a lot of different shapes and sizes, as many as there are people and more, because within each of us, there's 100 different ways to resist and to stay alive and to thrive and to tell stories. And that's what I want y'all to do. I want y'all to think about your own well-being. I want y'all not to burn out and not to drive yourselves in circles, wearing yourselves thin because someone else is trying to hold you down, which means that you can fight, but you also have to rest and you have to take care of yourselves, in part so that you can get up later and fight and take care of each other, right? That's all a continuum. But if you decide that you're just gonna fight all the time and never sleep and never get your other stuff done and never have fun and never watch Star Wars, you're gonna be miserable, you're gonna burn out, and you're not gonna do anybody any good. So I want you to like find pleasure in the struggle. I want you to find joy in making art. I want you to find your voice, but not stop there and find your next voice. Maybe it's in making clothes or beats, you know, or movies or whatever that might be, but never let anybody tell you what your voice is supposed to sound like or be or how it should come out. That's for you to figure out. And if anyone tries to tell you that, they're lying to you. You need to figure it out. And you need to let yourself have room to figure it out. It might be something that no one's invented yet, a new way to walk. You know what I mean? But I know that whatever the future holds, it requires us to invent new languages and new ways to live and to walk and to thrive. So live your best life. You coming? Good. Thoughts on comics? I love comics. And I'm writing comics now. It's my favorite thing. It's so much fun.
Are we looking at the?
Yeah, I was just looking at the question.
Chapel.
Were there any other questions? Are y'all looking at the?
I was looking at the chat box. If there's anything there that you want to.
Oh, I didn't see the questions. Hold on, let me look at that real quick. Caitlin's like, when are we asking our own questions? Come on. You can ask some questions. Let me see. Ryan Shadow Shapers, did you form show around the center together? Okay, we covered some of this, so that's good. John's about raising. Created an image of Robbie's body art. Oh, this is cool. So a lot of the stuff with Robbie's body art, yeah, it was research I'd already done to some extent. Just sort of knowing, you know, different Latin American histories and everything else, and Haitian history, and it was really just about throwing all that in there and kind of trying to make it beautiful, you know, in the form of tattoos. But I thought it was a really fun moment to be able to just like show history as it's written on the body, right? Did you look at the second book is connected and bring everything to? Did you find the plot and the sequel just? Book 1 and book 2. So I'm not sure I understood that question, but I'm gonna try to answer it about. Yes, Neville gets more involved in book 2. And also, I don't know if do you guys know about the novellas?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. It was like, oh yeah. But Neville's very involved in one of the novellas, Ghost Girl in the Corner. Because he's like everybody's favorite. Everybody loves Uncle Neville. I mean, he's like great. He's the best. I love him. Sierra's 16. I think she turned 17 in Shadow House Fall. Her birthday is November 2nd, making her a Scorpio. Same birthday as my mom. What was I gonna say? Book 2, right? So like I said, I didn't know I was gonna write a book 2. So a lot of it was like pulling threads and then figuring out where they went. But for me, like the process of book 2 was actually that I just started writing. I didn't really know what was gonna happen. And I was just like, let me just find out. I knew I wanted it to start in Prospect Park with them practicing and with the hound showing up. And then I wanted to sort of play that out. I knew there was going to be a deck of cards that was involved, but I didn't know what the magic system was going to be. I figured that out as I went. What did happen was somewhere in the middle, I had an image, and this is a spoiler, sorry. I had an image of Sierra throwing her hair back and having a skull painted on the face and being like, no, mother. And then like going ham on them and like destroying everything. And I knew like that was the moment I wanted to write towards. And if I could get to that moment and make it all make sense on the way, then it was gonna be a really cool book. And so that's what I wrote towards. That was kind of my guiding light, and that's what I made sure I arrived at. I see everybody leaving. I'm sorry, guys. Have fun in math class. People that think my book is unnecessarily political. That's my answer. I said before, like, what book isn't unnecessarily political, or who even gets to decide what's like necessary in politics? You know what I mean? I know for me, what was necessary was reading a book where my life mattered. You know, so that's necessary. So I'm writing for other people that need to see themselves, you know, not as like bait or a clown in a story. It's a great question, though. Internalized racism, it's got to end, right? we all carry it. You know, I think it's something we have to like address directly. Like I said, with everything, like history, like whatever it may be, is like something we just have to look at and delve into and not accept but acknowledge so that we can reject it. Anybody else? Did I miss any? Man, okay. With the Harry Potter question is complicated, right? Because when I was talking about it, this was before everything went down. I will say this though. First of all, trans lives matter. So I don't support anybody who's transphobic. You know what I mean? So there's nothing for Harry Potter that I have left in me. It's not even that great. It's good, but it's not worth like supporting a transphobic person over. So that's how I feel about that. And then on top of that, even before all that stuff popped off, like the retroactive diversity thing doesn't really work for me. You know what I mean? So like you can, it's all well and good to be like, oh yeah, Gandalf and Merlin and everybody else, they're all gay and black, and like you're lying. You know what I mean? Like I don't believe you. And also like what good does that do anybody who read the book, had no indication whatsoever that Dumbledore was anything besides straight, and then so it's like you find out later on Twitter, that's not diversity. That's just you trying to get cookies.
Yeah.
Do I connect to Sierra? I do. Sierra, I think of her as like a little sister, you know? Like I said in the beginning, like should be the part of me that I feel like I kind of gifted to her was art, a love of art. Like because I was such an art kid when I was growing up, particularly, and like art was my way of getting through things. That piece of hers was like that's me. And then there's just ways, of course, that we're very different, and and that's real too. So I just think of her as someone that I always want to protect. But I also know as a writer, it's like you gotta put those characters in danger for the book to be good. So you're always kind of like dealing with that different thing. But also like I really wanted Sierra to be like really badass, but not just like flat badass. You know what I mean? Like sometimes like especially when men write women, it's just like she's badass, awesome, she's rah. And it's like, okay, what does that mean? You know what I mean? Like I wanted her to have like leadership and to be like at the forefront of her group and really like take on that role, including like the challenges of it. So all that stuff going on with Robbie, where it's like he's not really there for her, and then but I also wanted her to find love, and that's when dude showed up.
I'm not gonna lie, when that happened, that hurt my heart.
Oh really? So wait, are you Team Robbie?
I'm Team Robbie, but Team Anthony.
No, I'm Team Anthony.
Anthony is the better choice. But Robbie, Robbie's a good dude for sure. I just think he wasn't ready for her at the time. Like they came into each other's lives at a moment where, as often happens, like Anthony shows up in book 2 and Creed 1. But he's Pulpo in book 1. He's mentioned. But
yeah.
You get to know him. But yeah, like Robbie, he had some growing up to do. We all do at different times. And it's like Sierra came into his life and he still had to grow up a little bit. And then she didn't have the time to wait around for him to grow up. Sometimes that happens. I've been there.
Well, unfortunately, we are out of time, but I just want to say thank you so much. When you first came on, I was literally starstruck. Like,
me too. It was such
really
a good
amazing.
Thank you guys. You guys are really, this was a really great interview. I really have a huge respect for you guys all, and especially for the questionnaires here. Kendall and Brianna, thank you for those thoughtful questions. It's so great to talk to people who've like read through the whole series too. So that really means a lot to me, because a lot of people have, a lot of times I'll do an interview and someone will be like, oh, let me just Google Shadow Shaper real quick. Oh, okay, well, why did you write this book? You know what I mean? And I'm like, these are great questions. Like, I really appreciate it. So thank you so much for engaging so deeply with the book.
They read those on their own too, because we only read one of them together. So that was.
Oh wow! Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Great. All right. That's really great. Well, stay in touch. You can
Thank you so much.
Reach out if you have questions. I can't read anybody's work, but if you have questions, you can get my email from your teacher. And you guys have been really wonderful. All right. So stay safe.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Take care of yourselves.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You guys did so well. You did so well. Did you have fun?
Very
Yeah.
nice.
It was so like it was like normal, like whenever like you know like you think of a best-selling author, you think of like, oh my god, like they're like immortal, but like it was like normal, like it was like his thoughts are like similar to ours, you know. It was amazing.
Yeah.
I'm so happy you liked it. I gotta leave so I could get to my 5th period. Even though they were here, they're probably jumping on over there now. So, thank you so much, Mr. Gorley, for
Have a
sending
wonderful day, everyone.
You girlies were awesome.
Yes, awesome job.